To the room. We have such a great conversation today. Um, put up our little banner. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining. All right, we can see you and we can hear you. Perfect. So we're going to get started. I am Christy Venable, CEO and founder of Smile Therapy Services, and we are a mental health and wellness agency providing support to individuals, but also to corporations through employee wellness, safe space sessions, and mental health consulting. And so we have a great group that is going to be before you today. We're going to be talking about trauma, right? But not just regular trauma. We are specifically going to be discussing trauma in the Black community. It's definitely going to be a heavy conversation. And I want to make sure that we all are ready for the conversation, prepared, but also already kind of minimize our anxiety, anything that may be on us, so that we can just be open to the conversation. And so to get us started, I'm going to bring up one of our clinical supervisors. Her name is Javay Evans. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she is actually going to start us off with a mindful minute. Okay, so 1 second. Hello, Javay.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Hey.
So
We're
get
about
us started.
to talk about.
Oh, hold on. Little technical
All
difficulty.
right. Talking about something. Okay. Can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay.
Yep, we can.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to invite you into a mindful activity that if at any point you feel triggered, you feel like you need to reset, you are free to come back to this. I want to invite you, if you feel comfortable, to sway, or you can tap with your arms crossed, or you can hit each one of your legs. And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. Okay? So go ahead and close your eyes if you feel safe enough to do so, taking a deep breath in and exhaling whenever your body feels ready. And you may start to tap if you feel comfortable. And what I'd like for you to do is to think of a place that you find comforting. It can be real or imagined, somewhere you've been or somewhere you would love to go. I invite you to notice what you see around you. Perhaps you notice things in distance, things that you notice that are right before you. Take a minute to acknowledge the sounds that you hear. They might be soft or loud. Perhaps there are others there with you that invoke peace or joy or calm. You might be eating something that you can only get from this special place. Take a moment to savor that flavor. Notice the textures and what you feel around you. Perhaps there's a temperature, a cool breeze, or you feel the warmth on your skin. Notice the scents that are present for you, whether they're strong or faint. Taking a look around, noticing if a calm, a peaceful, a joyful, or whatever emotion comes up for you in this special, secure place. As you begin to walk away, know that you can always return to this special place. Take a deep breath in and release that breath whenever your body feels ready. And you may come back to the present. Okay?
Thank you so much, Javay. I definitely needed that.
Great.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
All right, guys. I hope that was helpful for you, just to calm you, to really get you into this space, because we're going to be discussing some, just some heavy things, and just wanted you to have that balance and that presence, to be able to accept it. So now we are going to bring up two individuals that will be having this conversation with me today. And I'm going to bring them in. Hold on one second. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Christy. I can hear you.
All right, perfect. So they are going to introduce themselves. We are first going to start off with Miss Marissa Williams.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are so glad that you decided to join us. I'm Marissa Williams. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm the clinical director at Smile Therapy Services, and I specialize in trauma.
Perfect. Thank you, Marissa. And now we're going to have Mr. James Murray.
Cool. Thank you so much, Christy, for having me. Such an important conversation. Excited to get into it. So I'm James Edward Murray. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Therify. And so we are an inclusive mental health benefit for companies. And so we partner with large companies like Indeed, Thumbtack, DoorDash, and match their employees with licensed therapists who have similar backgrounds and shared experiences. And so the company was really inspired by my personal, mental health journey as a Black man in America. And, I grew up in an environment where I lost my dad early. I lost my dad to cancer when I was 12 years old. And so I had a lot of childhood trauma related to that, but didn't know that therapy, that mental health professionals were an option for me. It just wasn't something that we talked about in my household. And so as I got older, I still had symptoms, right, related to that trauma and that grief that I realized as an adult I needed to address. And so, I remember, deciding, building up the courage to go to therapy for the first time. I remember thinking that, it should be enough just to be courageous or brave to say, I'm going to go to therapy. And then you should be able to just start, right? And that was not the case at all. It was difficult to find providers who accepted my insurance, who were available, but then also to find providers who could empathize and understand my cultural identity and how that influenced my mental health. And so, I went through like 6 consultations before I found a fit. But what really, I think, drove me to try to solve this problem was seeing so many of my friends and family members in the Black community go through that same struggle and just give up and, not get the care that they desperately needed. And so that was kind of the inspiration behind Therify. And so, looking forward to talking more about some of this stuff with you all.
Perfect. And you already hit on a lot of different things that we'll be discussing today. And it's so important for people to understand that this is personal, right? One, we're all Black, and we all have our own traumas that we've individually experienced. But collectively as a community, we have shared traumas. And so we're going to get right into the questions for today. And the first question is, how would you define trauma, or how is trauma defined in general? Marissa, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So trauma can be any experience that causes discomfort. But the key is that it's going to linger and it's going to disrupt like your ability to function every day. So for example, if you get into a car accident, maybe in the moment you don't notice any side effects, everything's fine, insurance swap, then you realize the next day when you go to get in your rental car that your chest feels a little tight, or, you don't even want to drive. So like, I'll just catch a ride, or maybe someone else needs to ride with me. And so that would be a small example. But when we think about trauma in the Black community, we have to think about the reoccurrence of the traumatic event. So it's that series of experiences that we're having that are causing us to have the lingering symptoms and the token things that you might hear conversation. Oh, she's just an angry Black woman, or no, that, you know, that person's just ghetto. And so it's the way that we're responding to these certain things, triggers or experiences that we have that disrupt our inability to function and be successful on a daily basis.
Perfect. James, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what Marissa said. My definition is very similar. I think about it as anything that disrupts your sense of safety, right? And so, you know, for me, that was, you know, losing my dad, you know, unexpectedly when I was young, and then having to experience that void, right? Like that lack of protection that I felt from my father as a young boy, and then continuing, right, to try to grapple with that void as I got older. I think for me, and this happens for a lot of other people as well, that trauma, as Marissa alluded to, can lead to other symptoms, right? And so you're thinking about that trauma all the time. It can lead to burnout, it can lead to anxiety, depression, other symptoms that just compound. And of course, also to Marissa's point, trauma can manifest in different ways for different people. It can be a car accident, it can be racism, right? It can be violence in the home, right? Like so many ways that trauma can manifest in our lives, but it really comes back to you know, that disruption of safety.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great way to put it, that disruption of safety. And then I'm just going to read a definition from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. They say trauma is a severe emotional response to a frightening or threatening event or series of experiences that leaves a person overwhelmed and unable to cope. So very similar, right? Is how we define trauma. And someone mentioned in a comment, Sherelle said, yes, shared trauma. So true. And, you know, and just kind of piggyback off of that, we talked about the definition of trauma, and you actually, James, alluded to a couple of different types of traumas, as did Marissa. But what are some of the traumas that are specific to Black people?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of our traumas, right? And literally, this actually goes right to what Sherelle just said about shared traumas. What are some of our shared traumas that we all have dealt with, we are dealing with, and we will deal with kind of for, I feel like, times to come? You know, what are some of those things that you guys can identify?
I can start it off. I mean, we could go down a laundry list probably for, you know, 6 hours.
Let's go down the list. Let's just start
I'll like,
we can't hit all of them.
I will point on like 3 that come up for me. Racial trauma. I think about trauma within an economic context, and then I think of trauma within a health equity context. And so on the racial trauma side, I mean, I hate to say that it's almost self-explanatory, but, you know, I'll put it within a personal context. For me, you know, over the past 5 years, you know, seeing Black men being killed on TV over and over and over again, you know, that has disrupted my sense of safety as a Black man. You know, like there was a moment when I really didn't think much about getting pulled over, you know, not anymore. You know what I mean? And so that repeated trauma, you know, for me has become triggering, and I know it has for a lot of other black men and women, right? Because we see ourselves, right, in those folks who are the victims of that trauma, right? We look at that and say that could be us, that could be our family member, our cousin, our friend, whoever, right? I also think about it through an economic lens, in the sense that, you know, black households make half of what white households earn, right? And so, you know, are you in a situation where you're concerned about feeding your family, right? About supporting your family, serving your family, making sure that your family is safe within the health equity context? I mean, I've been reading a lot about, mortality rates related to Black women who are giving birth, right? And how Black women are more likely to pass away during birth, right? Which is just, I'm still trying to understand, right? You can only lead back to systemic issues that may be causing that. The fact that for so long we have been historically excluded and not had access to the quality healthcare that we need. And so you can break it down through, in so many ways, but those are a few of the things that I would start with in terms of things that we all collectively experience from a trauma perspective.
Perfect. Marissa, you want to add?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that even resonated with what you were saying, James, is the familial trauma within the Black community, and everything from social economic status to health disparities, but then just looking at the actual construct of the Black family in itself. You see a lot of single mothers, you see a lot of Black men that are incarcerated disproportionately, and it all goes back to the foundations of slavery, where Black people didn't even have the opportunities that would give us a level playing field. And so, yeah, someone might have gotten locked up or their parent is incarcerated, mom's working 3 jobs. But if you follow the timeline back of events, it's because mom and dad were separated at that child's birth, who could never even give that child the opportunities to have a safe household. So as you matriculate through life and you go through all of these different experiences, whether it's workplace trauma, whether it's medical seeking help, whether it's, educational disparities, it all goes back to the foundation of our ancestors' trauma. So from appearance to food access, to having healthy foods in inner city grocery stores, access to transportation, what that all looks like, it's all historical timeline dating back to the way that Africans were treated when they were brought over as slaves. So everything we do today is an example of a trauma. I had a conversation with a colleague and we saw an increase, and as a therapist, we're seeing increases in white people or Asians and Latinos coming to or preferring Black therapists too, because we figured it out. It's kind of the conversation that's been had about resiliency. So Black people have been brought up to be resilient because this is the environment that we live in. And it's everywhere we go, from shopping in the store without having somebody follow you around. So the list is 10 miles long, but for me, it all dates back to pre-slavery, even before slaves came over, and the ideas, the constructs around what Black people were going to be utilized for, when almost every single thing that we've created as contributors to America, we don't even have access to. So it's everywhere.
I mean, couldn't have said it better. It's everywhere, right? And I feel the same way, just in doing some research to prepare for today. You talk about, that pre-slavery to slavery and how just the effects from that have affected us until now. And some people, I've heard comments about, well, slavery was, all these years ago. Right? Yeah, from the other side. And they can't even fathom the effects that it still has on us, right? And so there's so many different types of traumas. We didn't talk about the war on drugs. That was really just a war on Black people, right? That still continues today, even though now all the white people are profiting off of marijuana. We're not talking about the education system and how we were segregated for so long and oppressed for so long just through education, and how we didn't have access to resources, and how that continues to affect us to today. Many of us that work at Smile, we came from the school system, right? And we see it. We saw it and we see it every day. So there's so many different types of traumas that literally continues to go on that we are all facing every day. So thank you for, all of those traumas, right? And there's more, right? We can't get into all of them because we have, a limited timeline. But let's talk about intergenerational trauma. And so some people may have heard intergenerational trauma. They may have heard the word, but maybe not really fully understand it. But we alluded to some of what it actually means. And so for you, what does intergenerational trauma mean to you? And then how does it continue to affect us to this present day?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, Marissa, I think, outlined this very eloquently. It is the passing down of that trauma, of that emotional reaction to oppression, right? From one generation to another. And so, just as an example, my parents were born into segregation in Nashville, Tennessee. And so you talked about the timeline, like it's not even my parents, right? Like, I mean, I'm sorry, not even my grandparents,
Right.
My
Your
parents,
actual
right?
parents.
My actual parents. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed when they were in high school, right? And so in much of their childhood, segregation was legal,
Yeah.
right? Racial discrimination was not illegal, right? That was their norm growing up as kids. The house that my mother grew up in, her neighbor was a prominent civil rights activist named Alexander Luby. Alexander Luby's house was bombed by white supremacists in response to Black people basically deciding that they weren't going to shop at the downtown department stores because they weren't allowed to sit at the lunch counters, right? And so because of that, white people decided to bomb this man's house, right? That is the real trauma that my mother grew up with. And so I think for a lot of us in this current generation, we always hear from our parents, our grandparents, you got to be 2, 3, 4 times better.
Yep.
And that's where that comes from, because they did not grow up on a level playing field. And so to be on a level playing field, you had to be 2, 3, 4 times better. And so the way that, that has been ingrained in my mind,
and mine,
right, in all of ours, it shows up. I worked at Facebook before I started this company, and I didn't see many people who looked like me in senior ranks. So I had that mentality of I got to do more than everybody else just to get promoted and recognized in the same way. And I did that, but it led to me being burned out. It led to me being anxious. It led to all these things, right? That because I'm doing so much just to, feel like I can be on that same level playing field, it adversely impacts my mental health, And so that's a very specific example of how intergenerational trauma works and how that gets kind of passed down from one generation to another.
And just what you said, and someone made a comment, Sharon, we have to be twice as good to be considered half as good. Woo, girl, yes. And just literally, even hearing that for me makes my blood boil, because she just said twice as good for us to be considered half as good. Already in the setback mode, right? We're already playing catch up just from that understanding and that just feeling and not even a feeling, because it's true, right? We've all been there. I went to a PWI, right? Predominantly white institution. I did it on purpose. However, you see it, you feel it. And I always had that I had to work twice as hard as, my white counterparts. My roommate loves her to death. She ain't hardly do half stuff, right? But it didn't matter because she was white. So it was just like, girl, she just lived, doing it. And I'm like focused. Oh, gotta get this, gotta make these grades out. And it is there, it is alive and well. And it definitely affects you. Like you say, it affects your mental health because it's like you're working so hard just to get here with them. Right. And Marissa, you want to add in?
Yeah, I mean, James, you made a good point, like what's ingrained in your mind, but epigenetics, which is the study of DNA and how our bodies are wired, there's actually research that shows that genetics, our genes reconfigure themselves. So not turn themselves on and off, but actually reconstructure and configure within our bodies. And that's going to control all types of health aspects for African Americans, stress levels, how we respond, how healthy our hearts are, our brain's development, because in order to feel good and to feel happy, our brain produces dopamine and serotonin. Those are the chemicals that are going to make us feel good and balanced. And so if we're, experiencing stressors and triggers on a day to day, our ability to produce feel good chemicals is going to be decreased. And so when we think about what we're passing on, and even from our own personal experiences and the things that have passed down in terms of traumatic experience with our ancestors, our bodies have been built to work through trauma. Yep. Which means how we respond with situations in the workplace, or how we're dealing with things in the grocery store, how we're raising our kids, right? Because our home is our safe space. So for us as Black people, we have to be very intentional on how we're changing and breaking that cycle, right? Because we want to come out of this place, but also understanding how our bodies are absorbing everything that we're experiencing every day and putting that pressure on us. And so that's why I think it's great that we got to start with the mindfulness exercise before talking about all of this, because it is a lot.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot. And I'm glad that you mentioned the health impacts. And so, I was literally reading an article as I was preparing just for today, and it's a Forbes article. And the article was entitled 3 Ways Intergenerational Trauma Still Impacts the Black Community. Great article, actually. I think I'm going to make a post about it tomorrow. But what I want to point out is what the writer, and I think her name was Janice. Let me make sure Janice was her name. Great article. What the writer pointed out about health outcomes, I think is so important for Black people to understand. And she said that, one, I wanted to allude to, she made mention of something called racial battle fatigue. Mm-hmm. Never heard of it before, right? And so when I read it, eyes lit up, because I'm like, ooh, this is like literally what racial battle, right? This battle of racism, right? And she says defined as the social phenomenon in which persons who experience chronic racial discrimination develop physiological, psychological, and emotional strain due to excessive amounts of energy expended on race-related stressors. Exactly what, we all deal with. And she said racism is associated with so many negative health outcomes. And one thing that she made note of was this whole point of hypertension, right? Or high blood pressure as we know it. And she said hypertension is a condition that affects a higher percentage of Black people compared to other racial or ethnic groups. And racism could be one of the contributing factors. Mm-hmm. And for me, it really hit home, because literally I'm dealing with high blood pressure right now, right? I'm not even that old. And it really just makes you realize that everything that we have either went through, including our ancestors, it stays in our bodies. It shows up in our bodies. And we have to, one, understand that, but make sure we're doing something about it too. So definitely wanted to point that out. Let's get to the next question, which is everyone wants to know. How do we begin to heal, right? And one, how do we begin to heal when we constantly continue to deal with the same things that doesn't seem like they're going away? What are your thoughts?
I think as a community, because we've been forced to, and, historically, we've become so good at hiding our traumas, and avoiding them and burying them, and a lot of it is just, out of, sense of self-preservation and protection, which I understand. But you also can't address an issue that you don't acknowledge.
Yeah.
And so I think it starts with doing what we're doing right now, in talking about it.
Yeah.
One of my kind of personal missions is to be vulnerable with my personal story, with anxiety, with depression, as a Black male, I'd say majority of my Black male friends, I know everybody's going through something,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But most of us don't talk about it or acknowledge it, because we're scared. We're scared of what people might think about us. We're scared of being judged, right? But you're never going to get to a place of peace
Yeah.
and healing, right, without having that conversation. It doesn't have to be a public conversation on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It could be a private conversation with a therapist, with the
Yeah.
loved one, right? And so for me, it's about destigmatization and showing people that it is okay, right, to have these conversations and to be vulnerable as Black people, right?
Mhm.
That's the first step to healing. I won't talk about it from a clinical perspective because I'm not a clinician, right? I'm sure Marissa has some interesting insights there, but I think for me, that is the most important part. Is we just need to talk about it more.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We have to acknowledge it. That's definitely the first step. And so I know we're at 2:02,
Yeah.
and guys, James have to hop a little early. So I want to see if anyone have any questions specifically that he can answer right before he jumps off. So I'll just check the chat. And just kind of let you give us, a few more kind of closing words around, this trauma in the Black community, and any other just, suggestions and resources that you want to provide everyone who's on. Now I'll check the chat if there's any questions for you.
Yeah. One thing I did want to address is kind of this intersection between mental health in the workplace, especially within the context of employees of color. And if there are, companies who are listening, we work really closely with DEI teams to make sure that employees from marginalized groups have access to care that is understanding of their experiences. I think the first thing that I suggest to all companies is, you have to build the infrastructure to support employees from underrepresented backgrounds, right? Like doing the D in the DEI, diversity, representation, getting people in the door, it's super important. But you also got to build the infrastructure to support us and keep us there once we're in the door.
That part.
Right.
We're more likely to leave our jobs for mental health reasons. Our mental health is more likely to be impacted by our jobs.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you don't focus on that infrastructure, you're going to have a leaky bucket.
Yeah.
Right. Your folks are not going to stay. And so, we may be, the first in our families to be in this corporate space, right? This may be new to us. So like, help us find sponsors, right? Help us find guidance to make sure that we can navigate and be successful in this system, right? And then beyond that, also just be aware and empathetic to news that's happening in the world that may impact us, that may not necessarily impact you as someone who's in the majority, right? Like, I remember every instance of, someone Black being killed at the hands of police and being at work and not being able to focus, just really being emotionally in my feelings and having other people around me talking about Game of Thrones, whatever, like totally detached, right, from what I was experiencing as a Black employee. And so, we spend 75-80% of our time at work.
Yeah.
And so for the companies out there that are really serious about diversity and supporting underrepresented employees, that's just a couple of nuggets that I want to leave.
And it's actually going to be a great segue to where we're going to go after you chop off, because we're going to the workplace, right? And so thank you for those comments. And I just want to add along those lines of that infrastructure, creating that culture.
Yeah.
Of that, yes, you can have a diversity as a focal point, right? And if you don't have the infrastructure but also if you don't have the culture, because if you are not, inclusive, one, in your culture, in your language, in how you, respond to people, support people, and that's not trickled down, to the lower lines, it's not going to work. And it's not working. And that's why a lot of people are, leaving companies and, doing other things, because our mental health is important. And we are not at a stage where we can continue to deal with the same things that we've been dealing with for years. So thank you so much, James. I know you have to jump. I'm so glad that you can at least be on to give your nuggets. Let people know where they can find you, how they can get in touch with Therify if they would like more information.
Yes. If you want to get in touch with Therify, therify.co is our website. Our email is hello@therify.co. Feel free to reach out. Would love to be supportive however I can.
Yes, perfect. But we're going to try to
Thank
do
you,
some more
James.
things in the future. So glad to be able to connect with you. And we will talk soon.
Thanks, y'all. All right. Take care. I'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye.
So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to share some of the comments. And Kelsey was saying the difference between diverse versus actually inclusive environments. Yep, like we said. And then Sharon mentioned, that's so interesting. When we say this place is toxic, I have to leave, it's often looked on as they can't handle the hard work. Why should we keep hiring them? Woo. That's deep. And we're going to get to that. Thank you, Sharon. We are going to get to that. But I'm going to circle us back to the healing piece. And Marissa, for you to just add in some specific kind of clinical things as it relates to us healing from trauma. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, James made a good point about having conversations, like not necessarily LinkedIn Live, but sometimes we need to have a conversation with ourselves, right? And checking in to know what's your capacity, where are you? Because with trauma, you might not always understand your trigger or where something's coming from. Yep. So my best recommendation would be to just kind of evaluate where you are. And when you notice that you are feeling a little bit different, you can be, that might be angry, it might be extra happy, over attentive. It looks different for everybody, but just kind of do a self check-in to figure out where you are. As you go through your day and your different environments, whether that's work, whether it's church, whether it's sporting, your friends, make sure that you feel supported in those spaces, because trauma triggers can happen at any point. They can happen anywhere. And sometimes they're latent, meaning that you don't even know that it's a trigger for you until something else happens. So making sure that you know where you are, who is safe for you, or how you can be safe in that environment. Therapy is another thing, and that's a whole nother probably 3-hour LinkedIn Live about therapy in the Black community, because Black people just didn't go to therapy. And I remember being fully transparent when I was 9, asking to go to therapy. And my Baba looked at me, that's my Papa. He looked at me and was like, girl, what's wrong with you? You better pray to Jesus. And that was kind of the answer. They did eventually, get me in with the therapist. But for Black people, one, it's not accessible. It costs so much. Then the therapist didn't look like us. And I don't know if you all have ever heard about the Black DSM, if there are any clinicians on here, but it is a good resource for anyone who is of color, who's Black, that's been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, because the conditions and the criteria look different because our needs look different. So if you do partner with the therapist, make sure that you understand your diagnosis that they're giving you and that you feel comfortable being vulnerable about your experiences. And, therapy can be challenging to access, and it's hard, especially right now in our climate, to find a therapist. Like, wait lists are months long. But it's okay if you don't find the right therapist the first go round. Like, it can take a couple of consultations, a couple of sessions. I would say don't give up. If therapy is something that you feel like you would benefit from, really do your research and find the good fit for you. It's almost like dating, it seems like, with all the little mental health apps and then the wait list, and you're calling to find the right resource. But if you can find a person of color that can appreciate and understand and empathize with your experience and your experiences, because you're still living them every day, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot.
It is. And I was also going to just say, you know, when it was mentioned to just acknowledge, you know, the trauma, and you know, minimize this stigma that we have in our community as it relates to therapy, right? We also have to change the way we are teaching our children. I think now we are a little more open to therapy, at least, you know, most people, but but I still hear comments, right? Even from parents and other individuals or adults, if a child is going to therapy, right, and making comments about them being crazy or someone else being crazy because they go to therapy, we have to change our language, and we have to change our thought process about opening up for therapy. It's something that I've read about a statistic, and it said that 63% of Black people view a perceived mental health condition as a sign of personal weakness. That is insane when you think about it, right? Because we are saying to ourselves that we cannot have a mental health challenge, right? That we cannot, that it's not okay for us to be overwhelmed, to be overworked, and to actually be affected by that. That's what we're saying when we do not, or when we are not open to mental health in general, or even being educated around mental health. And so I really want us to make sure that in order to heal, we have to start within our own selves first, and then within our family unit, and start talking about, you know, mental health, how you're feeling, how, you know, with our children, because our youth are feeling it and they are not afraid to tell you about their feelings, you know, or sometimes they won't talk about it. They may talk about it with someone else. And so you want to be open. And you don't want to look at everything like, oh, you just, you know, well, you know how we are. You just this, or, you know, are you trying to get attention, or you try, you know, we have to take what they say, and we have to, you know, really talk through the issues, the problems, the hurt, right? Because everyone's experience is their own. And something that affects you or something that affects your child may not affect you. But that's okay. It doesn't mean that it's not a real situation or a real pain point for that child. And we have to do a better job of that as the community that we're in, so that we can start to heal. I think that's really a major part. Making sure that we are minimizing our own stigma around mental health therapy, and not feeling like we have to own everything and we have to take on every single thing that we're dealing with, and probably that our family is dealing with or our friends are dealing with, and not get any help. Those times are gone.
Right. And just give yourself grace, you know, because every day we're going through so much, and sometimes we can be even more so hard on ourselves than other people. But everything you said, Christy, goes directly back to plantation living, slave mentality. You don't show that you're weak, don't show that you're sick, because if we were vulnerable, we were killed. Or separated from our family. And so those are the pieces that, you know, we have to change, those conversational pieces around how we're handling feelings. I encourage my son to cry. And you want to go ahead, baby, get it out, right? And again, that's a societal stigma within the Black community. You know, men can't cry. You have to be tough. But just opening that space and allowing for us to share with each other how we're feeling and growing into a place of being vulnerable.
Yeah. And, you know, we didn't touch on this when we talked about the different types of trauma. But one thing that was brought up when I was doing my, you know, just researching, I'm like, yes, let me just make sure I mention it, was the internalized oppression that we put on ourselves, right? And when I say internalized oppression, what that looks like in our community is, you know, us feeling like we have to be a certain way because of what other people, right, what the majority have said that we have to be. So, you know, that could look like colorism, right? us oppressing each other because of the different shades of our skin, right? Texturism, all of those different things, because the majority has told us that this way of look is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
We're not even going to go into the hair situation, right?
Right.
And so I want everyone to fully understand that all of these things are traumas, and they all affect us, and one thing that I read, and I want to and I'm going to see if I wrote it in my notes so I can read it verbatim, but it really kind of blew my mind. It's really off of what I just talked about. It says the remnants of settler colonialism have deceived Black people into thinking that the enemy is each other.
Mm-hmm.
When in actuality, everyone is harmed by the very same system. And it's really, just that statement alone, all I see is the flashes of all the violence that's in our community, right? And how the media makes us think that, and someone literally just put it into the chat, how the media makes it seem like it's the Black on Black crime, and all of those different things. When in actuality, it's just a crime. Because when white people kill white people, they don't say white on white crime, right?
They don't.
And most of the time they say they had a mental health issue, right? We're not even going to go to that, right? How the media portrays everything. But we have to fully understand what other people's, that hold that other people has had on us in our community for far too long. And I think that even goes back into how we support or don't support each other as the Black community in the workplace, right? So we're going to get to the question in the workplace. But someone had just put a post up that I responded to, and they put it up yesterday, I believe, talking about women, supporting each other. And I want to break that down to Black people in general supporting each other, and how we feel like, and I made a comment back to her, and how I said, we have to get out of this crab in a barrel thought process, that mindset, right? But where did that start from?
Mm-hmm.
It started from slavery. Because they pit us against each other from the beginning. The light people in the house, the darker people outside. And all of that did was literally go with us from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. And that's how that internalized racism and oppression started. And so it is just, when you think about it, it's a long history of the things that people have done to us that has affected us and still continues to affect us to this day. And so I want to touch on this. Christina mentioned something, and she said, "With my upbringing, it was what." Let's talk about that. What goes on in this house
stays in this house.
Stays in this house, and we all have heard that, right? It says, we didn't get to share our emotions or talk about how we feel. Therapy wasn't an option, although it was definitely needed. I'm the complete opposite with my children. And that's where we have to be, because we've learned. Yes. We've learned better now. And she said, nothing is off limits, and we talk things out around here. Thank you so much, Christina, for that comment, and just bringing that up, because what goes on in this, if what goes on in this house stays in this house was a person, right? It'll be all of our sister and brother, because we all have heard that.
All of us. We
all have heard that. And how does that actually affect us, right? It actually plays into that intergenerational trauma. Mm-hmm. Our parents never taught us, right? Our parents' didn't teach them how to deal with things. It was like, you better shut up before I give you something to cry for.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Don't make me give you something else to cry about.
Mm-hmm. And so we now that our generation kind of knows a little better, right? We try to do things a little different, but we still have those moments like, you better whoop that child. I know I'm you. You better get it, whoop that child. But it's like, we have to do better. As a Black community, we have to do better, because all of those different things and how we were taught, it only continues the intergenerational trauma with the next generation. Yes, and people are saying, yes, suck it up, right? We've heard all of those things, and it continues to affect us and continues to go to the next generation and to the next generation. We have to start breaking that cycle. And I'll throw this out there, and people gonna feel away, but whipping your child, right? I know I got whippings too, but
I did. Plenty of them.
But even when I really fully think about you whipping a child, and really not until today, I said, you know what? That actually came from slavery, where we were whooped. And why do we continue to put that on our kids? Yeah. That is a trauma. I mean, and then it's like, well, what if you whip me? I mean, did I really even learn my lesson? I'm just kind of bruised up and hurting, because for me, and it was crazy because I felt like, all right, let me just get this whooping so I can go back outside. Like, I may do it again, but I'm just like, okay, all I gotta get is a whooping because I never want to be punished. Let me just get this whooping. But it's like, that shouldn't be the case. And so we really, as a Black community, have to really think about all of those things and how it is affecting us and how it affects our children. How it affects our children growing up.
Right. And it's all connected. It's all connected. And I had to see that so many people in the comments are talking how they are raising their kids differently, or creating these open spaces to communicate how they're feeling and what their experiences are. But I don't know that whoopings work for us as kids. But if you think about it from the master-slave relationship, the slaves went up and picked their cotton the next day. So, I mean, some of us escaped, thank God, and we got to where we are now. But it worked for that purpose, but it does not work for us from a child rearing perspective.
Yeah, and then I'm just going to show some of the comments. Christina says, traumatizing. Oftentimes they still don't, they still do what they get whipped for. They just don't get caught. They don't learn anything.
That part.
Right, because you learn how to do it a little better the next time. And then Cherie says the whoopings were more emotionally damaging than physical, right? Because then you become scared of your parents, and so you don't want to talk about anything or don't want to share anything. So that's definitely how some people feel. And then it says, when it came to therapy, we were taught you talk to strangers. Well, you weren't taught not to talk to strangers, right? Not to talk to strangers about your issues and problems. And I think that is why we also have such a big stigma around therapy, because in our community, we were taught you don't tell people your business. And we still have that on us today. You don't tell people your business. And so, right, we couldn't talk to strangers, period, right? That's what
right.
Exactly.
And a big part of that goes to systemic racism, because if you did need something or you did reach out to someone, the belief system that the oppressor would have had within that system, especially at a time where most of your social workers were white because we couldn't afford education, and all of the different, roles, nurses, doctors, the helping professionals didn't look like us. Yeah. So for us to go and say, hey, I need help, or to get help at the start of when, normalizing services or getting help, it would have been an oppressive relationship.
Yeah.
So I think it was some protective measures that our ancestors were putting in place. But then there was also that same thing going back to, again, slave times, where you couldn't talk about a vulnerable spot, because then your master is going to know how to come in and get in that divide and create more space. So I think the ideas behind the way that our parents were trying to raise us are definitely rooted in slavery and racism. But hopefully we're having those conversations now where, hey, this is who you can trust, or who do you trust? If you do need help, or who can support you.
Yeah, definitely. And so we're getting to our last kind of topic. And James alluded to some of it, and he, gave us some kind of suggestions before he left about what can corporations do to support their Black employees. And it's definitely such a major situation in these workplaces. And I think it is absolutely horrible to hear about the workplace trauma that some Black people actually deal with, right? It's really like heartbreaking. And then it's like, why do we stay when we're being treated this way? Right? Because one reason I thought of, because we was told, you go in there, you better keep that job, and do that job, put your head down and get that work done. Don't, and it's like, no, those times are done. It's over. You can't be treating us any type of way. Not in this day and age, right? And so what do you say are some of the ways in which corporations, like, what can they do to start making sure that they are being more inclusive for Black people in specific?
The biggest thing that I would say corporations can do, one, is listen to your people of color. It's not their responsibility to educate you around best practices or what's culturally appropriate. But if they're bringing a concern to HR, to a supervisor, to whoever, you want to listen and validate what their experience is. I think Kelsey put it in the chat earlier, the same thing that James was mentioning, diversity needs to be another step right after. You need to be intentional around the equality, the equity, the inclusion, the support, the cultivation of that culture and environment in your workplace. It's not just, hey, we're going to put this word up here. And some of you might have heard, oh, that's the token Black girl. That's the token, the Black project. We put a flyer on the wall for Black History Month, and that's it. My job closed and gave today off. But shout out to Smile. But make sure that you are aware of the climate of what's happening and provide resources. If you're connected with EAP supports or you're offering benefits, make sure that you're including providers that look like your people of color, that come from backgrounds or experiences where they would not just attend a certification course, but have not only lived experience where they can connect. Because in therapy or any type of helping relationship, you want someone that's not only going to be able to empathize with you, but help you grow and support you through whatever transition. So if your goal is to not only hire people of color with your DEI initiative, you want to make sure that you go beyond just retention. Yes. But you also think about the impact that you would have on the Black community with how you're supporting your Black employees.
Yeah. And I'm just going to answer two questions before I make my comment. Will the replay of this conversation be posted? Yes. So if you guys have saw my post in LinkedIn, that's where you can go to see the replay, or you can maybe go to your events or your past events. So you can, yes, you can definitely see this. And Kelsey actually just posted that we'll be sharing this on our YouTube. If you're not on our email list, put your email in the comments. We'll get you on there. We share, we send out emails after this so that we can give you the link on how to look at the replay or everything. And yes, you can share this. Just share my posts with this event in it, and then it can go to whoever you want to share it to, or you can share our YouTube post once we get you that link. So just wanted to make sure I acknowledge that, just in case they had to jump off. And so for the corporations, yes, I totally agree, right? Everyone say they want to be diverse, right? Or they want this diversity. But then when you really get the people in, what are you actually doing?
Right.
What are you actually doing for your diverse employees? And so, one thing that we preach, because we do work with a lot of corporations as well, and we continue to work with them, tech companies and school districts in particular, but we really preach for the mental health piece is having that, just don't have your EAP. Right? Because sometimes the EAP ain't got no Black people. Let's be honest.
Exactly.
Right. Because you can send them to your EAP, child. They can't find a single Black person on your EAP list. right? And now they done gave up because they tried to do their due diligence, went through their EAP, can't find that one Black person. Black people want to see Black people, is what it is, right? Sometimes we might be okay seeing, someone else, but for the most part, we want someone to fully understand us. So we try to see other Black professionals, but do preventative mental health support for your employees. What does that look like? That looks like having ongoing support for them, not just like a one and done. Don't just do something during Black History Month. You bring someone in, you talk about something, or just do one thing during Mental Health Awareness Month. Now you think, oh, well, I did this, so they should be cool. You just checking a box. Make it a part of your culture. And that's for anyone. Make it a part of your culture. Make mental health a part of your culture. Everyone is dealing with some form of trauma. And if you are not putting in some preventative supports in the workplace, you're behind the 8 ball, right? We just talked about that most of our time as adults is spent in the workplace. And so we have to make sure as leaders of corporations, of organizations, that we are actually valuing our employees by putting different things in place for them to support the different things that they're going through. And that includes with their mental health, but that also includes specifically for your Black employees or your other diverse ethnicity employees. They need to see people that look like them, right? They need to have spaces that are truly safe, right? And so at Smile, we do safe space sessions for corporations. But what does that actually mean? We provide that safe space so they can actually talk through different issues and situations that they are dealing with. And it's actually by a person that looks like them, so they feel safer, right? So make sure you are, not just checking a box, but really working to change your culture. Really working to change your culture. So, this was a great conversation. I think we, thank everyone for the comments. I'm just going to throw some more up that I saw that I wasn't able to see, but Dr. Turner says, and this goes back to the whooping, some of us are still living off some of the whoopings we got as kids. We jump today when we do something wild or crazy as adults, like the switch of belts coming our way from our parents and our minds. That trauma is real. Real talk, right? That's definitely real. And so I definitely want to thank everyone for being in the comments. Let us know if you have any last minute questions or comments that you want to say. This really can be a whole day worth of talk, right? Because there's so much information. There's so many different things that we've experienced in the Black community that still affects us to this day. And we not only want, I also in my post today, I said, allies welcome. Because the way we are really going to be able to deal with this and truly heal is if the people from the majority group, if they do things differently. And right now, some of them aren't, right? We didn't even touch on Florida and the madness and the craziness that's going on down here trying to erase Black people's history. We didn't even touch on that. And where are the white people that need to be speaking up for that, right? We can't get there.
It's a lot. I feel like we need a whole series.
It's too much. It's too much to touch on. But it's frustrating. And people don't understand that for us as Black people who are the ones that are affected, we are the ones have to relive this every day. That's why I don't even look at the news. Because there's so many negative things on there. I can't take it. I don't have the capacity to even take it. Like my mind, my body, nothing can take it. I can't watch it too much. And so, to my Black people on here, we see you. We know what you're dealing with. We are trying our best to just provide that mental health space for you, that education for you. That's why we do these LinkedIn Lives. We'll be doing some just community events soon, but just giving you guys some safe spaces to talk through, some of your different challenges and situations that you have. I want to tell everyone on here, stay encouraged, right? And I know back in the day, our parents used to say, pray about everything, right? We do still have to pray about everything, but we also have to put the work in. You have to go see a therapist. You have to work through your issues. Prayer definitely works, but even God says, seek out a counselor, right? That's in the Bible. And so make sure that we are doing all of those different things. Marissa, any last minute words?
Yes, just a nugget for the allies. Christy made a very good point about the importance of safe spaces for Brown people in the workplace. But I want to encourage and maybe challenge some of our allies that got to join us or that will watch this in the future to figure out and be intentional around creating brave spaces. Yeah. And a brave space is the next step from a safe space. And that's probably a whole nother conversation too. But what can you do as an ally to cultivate the sentiments that are happening in brave spaces? And that would be only if they're shared with you. But what can you do to make sure that every space in your organization feels safe for a person of color? Yeah. And so do some of that work too on your own. If you're an ally, that doesn't mean put a Black person in charge of the work group. But figure out how you can make sure, whether that is adding an intentional statement in your policies, maybe it's giving extra time and space for safe spaces to happen, but encourage these supports that you might implement for Black and Brown people to be utilized. And make sure that it's not a place of I have to do this, but I'm stepping out and I'm taking a leap because I know that this is unjust and I want you to thrive in the work environment. So create some brave spaces.
Yes, perfect. Thank you for that, Marissa. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please reach out to me if you have any other questions around this topic or anything else, or if you are an individual working at a corporation and want some extra support around your mental health, especially with your Black and Brown community. We are here to do that. Go to our website, smiletherapyservices.com. Catch us on Instagram. We put a lot of educational pieces out there. That's at Smile Therapy LLC. Send me a DM. Let me know how you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all so much. Until next month. Next month is Women's History Month. I don't know what we're going to be talking about, but it's going to be something good. So you guys just look out for that event for next month and have a great and safe rest of your week. And we'll see you guys soon.
Bye everyone. Thank you.